Welcome everyone to the Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network USA webinar, Global Advisory Board Trends and the Opportunities for Accountants and Firms. You can gain insights into why advisory boards are the new trend in business and governance today. I'm David Powell, CEO of Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network USA, and before we start, some housekeeping. Handouts are available. You can download them from the control panel for this event. It's a small perpendicular rectangle on your screen, and if you press the little white arrow on a red background at the top, you'll get all the options, including the ability to add questions. Now, CPE and polls. This webinar is CPE eligible if you have requested it. To qualify, you will need to answer the polling questions we will be asking during the webinar. There are 4 polls during the webinar and a survey when you exit. You need to answer at least 3 polls to qualify and attend for at least 50 minutes. The format of this webinar is a 60-minute presentation, including this introduction. If you have questions, note them in the Q&A tab on your control panel. We will also be recording this presentation and will make it available on the CAW Network USA website and the CAW website after editing and approval. At the end of this event, when you exit and take the survey, do let us know what you think, and also let us know if you want us to connect you to our presenter. Learning objectives. After this presentation, you should be able to understand the key markets using advisory boards, the most common advisory board models used in the business sector, how advisory board members are compensated, an evaluation of the 5 key best practices for advisory events. These will be followed by a wrap-up session and Q&A. And now let me run our first poll. The poll is, what is the most common composition of external advisors on an advisory board? And you have a choice of 1, 2, 3, or 4. So if you can actually think about that and submit your answer. While you're doing that, I'd like to introduce our presenter. This is Louise Brokman, founder and CEO of the Advisory Board Centre based in Brisbane, Australia. Louise has a master's degree from Griffith University and is a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Louise has specialised in the professional services and advisory sectors for 20+ years as an entrepreneur, a researcher, and a business advisor. She's taken a licensed model internationally to 8 countries and has extensive experience in chairing commercial advisory boards for high-growth businesses. She's been on both sides of the boardroom table as the founder of her own companies and as the advisor or chair of multiple advisory boards. Today, she will share some of her thinking and approach with you. And now let me close our poll and look at the results. And share the results. We have majority say it's 3, and I will let Louise comment on what that actually is when I pass to Louise now. Thank you, Louise, over to you.
Thanks, David, and it's lovely to be here and to have the time with everyone here today as well. I'm on 2 screens, one with my camera on my phone as I'm travelling and the presentation here today as well. So the answer to that poll is 3 external parties, of which are 2 advisors and an independent chair. What's interesting, a chair is also an advisor. So it's a good question, and great to see everybody on the board with that as well. So I'm just going to take you through just a bit of an introduction to start with. The Advisory Board Centre is the global professional body for the advisory board sector. So our role as an independent professional body is to support the growth of the advisory board sector around the world, to raise the standard for individuals who add advisory boards into the work that they do, and then in turn for the organisations that they serve. We operate in over 31 countries, and our key role is research, education, professional development, and advocacy for best practice around the world. We run our programs in Singapore, Dubai, London, Paris, Toronto, New York, and in Australia, where I'm from. I started the Advisory Board Centre, we're coming up to being 8 years young now, because an advisory board changed my life. I had a business that I started in 2001. In 2005, we really wanted to focus on our global growth strategy. I didn't want to have a full board of directors as a business owner because I didn't want to lose control of the decisions that I was making. So I thought I'll put together an advisory board. And in 5 years, we had built that business to 135 offices in 8 countries. When I sold that business, I was so impressed with what the advisory board had done for the business, but also for me. We then invested 5 years to research, test and validate advisory board structures around the world. And as an outcome from that, the development of the chair certification and our global professional body to support the growth of the sector. Now, our research, and I'm going to be sharing with you the State of the Market report, some of the key trends from that. Both Korn Ferry and Financial Times have both referred to that particular report. We produce it every 2 years as the hot new governance trend because of the shift in the relationship between advisory boards and the governance board. Just on the 1st of November this year, the Australian Institute of Company Directors, which is the largest institute for company directors around the world, with I think there's around 60,000 members. They also referred to our research and interviewed our CEO, Udo Doring, as part of that, and did a five-page spread in the Company Directors magazine talking about the increased utilisation and the need for advisory boards and governance boards to utilise them as a really effective tool, of which I'll go through some of those trends with you today, as well as the business sector trends as well. So some of the things we'll look at is the mega trends, what's happening in the advisory board profession itself, what's happening in the different parts of the market, and the trends for the profession for the longer term. If we put it into perspective, advisory boards traditionally were viewed in the market as being independent of a governance board, and they're different. And that's absolutely right. The governance board is a decision-making model, and it's binding, and it's a serious undertaking, and rightly so when a director can go to jail for the decisions that are made or not made at the governance board table. An advisory board is not a decision-making model, it's a problem-solving model. So they're not there to make decisions, they're there to inform the strategy, where the governance board then forms the strategy. So traditionally, they are seen as being two very different functions. Today, we are now seeing the evolution of governance. So we have actually changed the language from a governance board into a governance system. So if we just unpack that for a moment, Financial Times talks about governance boards getting smaller. Harvard Business Review, on the other hand, talks about the actual function of governance is getting bigger. So if the governance board is getting smaller but governance is getting bigger, we're then creating an ecosystem of which governance actually exists, so it's not one-dimensional. So having a governance system now enables advisory boards to really support governance boards in the decision-making cycle without actually being part of the decision. So if we think about this, governance board director doesn't go to jail because they made a good or a bad decision. They go to jail because they don't show good due process in the way the decisions are made. And this is an absolutely new trend where advisory boards have this new function outside of the traditional business sector, where they are really supporting governance board directors in areas of specialised conversations. Now, if we look at the governance dilemma we're addressing, is that governance board directors, business owners, governance boards of large organisations, they're still directors. Directors are increasingly becoming constrained and having a higher level of personal liability. But what they need to cover off and be confident in the decisions they're making means that their agenda is getting bigger. And so I just recently spoke with a secretariat of a publicly listed company. He compared the agenda that they have now to 10 years ago, and they're worlds apart. And so being able to make confident decisions in areas of deep expertise around not only financial performance, good stewardship, sustainability, increased regulations and increased expectation of stakeholders means that the way that a governance board would traditionally work is a real dilemma whether it can continue to work in that way. So what do? Do they actually work harder? Do they have longer meetings? Do they bring in specialist consultants or employees? Bring in more directors who are specialists? Have more committees or advisory boards, or do something else, or potentially don't do anything at all and just hope that everything's okay? In some ways, there's an evolution that's happening in governance, of which advisory boards is a piece of that. It's not the only thing. There are many different options, but it's something that should be really deeply considered in organisations today. So what that is doing is that it's actually impacting the shape of the advisory board profession. We map this every 2 years with a report. In 2019, there were about 1.3 million advisory board professionals around the world. Today, we see that there's over 2.6 million, so it's more than doubled. What's really important, I think, for the network that we have here today is the largest part of the market for advisory boards is in the US market, at 54% of advisory board professionals in the US, largely driven by the investors. Then we have the UK European market at 23% of the market, and the Asia market then at 7%. So the growth of advisory boards and the profession is being driven both by individuals having a desire to build advisory boards into their service offering, firms adding it also into their service offering, but then organisations themselves needing to bring the outside in to really navigate not only the future, but just to navigate decisions that they're making today. And this is very, very new. For the advisory board profession itself, it's also shifting. Now, traditionally, we would see the advisory board profession as being above the surface of an iceberg. So if we look at our own membership, we've got about 650 members in 31 countries. About 10% of our members are actually members of firms, so partners of accounting firms or executives, and they're building advisory boards in as part of their service offering to the market. You'll see that in many accounting firms, as an example, BDO in Australia, many of the partners are certified chairs and they're adding advisory board services to their market-facing activity. Then we have the portfolio professionals, people who are wanting to be doing multiple things and not be defined by just one role. And the portfolio professional is about 60% of our members across the world. Now, they will generally have 5 to 6 different gigs on at any given time, of which advisory boards is about 30 to 50% of their portfolio. Now, they'll be doing a blend of different things. They'll be doing advisory boards and governance boards, consulting or professional service delivery, lecturing or interim executive. But to actually provide a blend of different services is a smart way that they are looking to work for the rest of their life, but not having just one role defining their professional life. We are seeing younger people entering into the portfolio profession, so it's not just a baby boomer activity. We're seeing more and more people in their early 40s deciding to go down this road as well. Then we have the market that's beneath the surface that sometimes gets forgotten in the advisory board profession, but it's going to get bigger and it's going to drive a lot of corporate activity in the advisory board profession. So you get the transition professional. They may be a CEO now. They may be a C-suite executive or a business owner. Now, if we look at the CEO or a C-suite executive, they would look to leave their day job, so to speak, in 3 to 5 years' time. And they build their capability in advisory boards and shift internal committee structures into advisory boards. So they're actually building their experience, but also adding more value to the work that they do. And then for the longer term, they're building then their expertise to then not just go from everything into nothing and extend out their advisory board portfolio. They may even do advisory boards outside of their day job with startups or scale-ups, or one or two advisory boards with a not-for-profit. The other transition professional is a really smart one and a really interesting one for the work that you do. So business owners, when they're looking to exit, we know that it takes a period of time to do that. I'll give you an example of 3 business owners who decided to exit their business, and they knew that would take time. One of the first things they did is they removed themselves out of the business day to day and placed themselves on the advisory board. So they stepped back to enable their executive team to step up. By the time that they sold their business, they got a higher multiple value for their business and a shorter earn-out period because they could demonstrate that the business operated without them. Equally, they gave themselves a pathway to continue to contribute to fellow entrepreneurs once they'd sold their business. The last group is the internal lead chair and the advisory board manager. These are people who are employees inside large organisations like universities and government and multinationals who will never leave their job, but they'll maintain the management function of the advisory boards within their role. They are really critical in large organisations to have continuity, but also to accelerate the impact of advisory boards by really careful project management. So there are many different functions there in the profession. If we look at the advisor landscape, where do advisory boards sit in the landscape of advice? So as a consumer of advice, you might then go to different types of advisors for different types of things, from informal through to formal. So informally, advice is provided from family and friends, whether you want it or not, they're going to give it to you. Then peers in business and business network groups, where the socialisation of advice, where business owners get together with other business owners or executives get together with their peer groups, and they provide that mutual support. Where people say it's lonely in business, these types of advisory systems are really important. Then you get the one-to-one advice, the accountant, the business coach, mentor, consultant, individual expert advisor, where there's a clear mandate about what the advice is, there's clear edges to it. Where it gets tricky from an ethics point of view is when trust is really built, then owners in particular will have an expectation that one person will have the answer for everything for what they need, because they'll go to them because of that trust. Now, a service provider may go there not because they want to do the wrong thing, but because they just want to help. And so there becomes an ethics grey area here around where advice should and shouldn't be provided by external providers when there's a clear mandate about their scope of work up front. Then there's advisory boards, which is the next level of engagement, where there's a charter, there's a chair, there's internal and external representation on that advisory board based on the priorities that have been identified, and there's measurement of impact. And generally they'll meet 4 or 6 times a year for an all-of-business advisory board. Then you have a governance board, the most serious undertaking, where they meet most often 10 times a year. Average size of a governance board in the US is 12, and it's legally binding. And again, the difference between a governance board and advisory: governance boards make decisions, advisory do not make decisions. They are there in a problem-solving setting. Now, advisory boards themselves, there's no one size fits all. There are many different types, again, from informal to formal. Informal, where a business or a not-for-profit may not pay people, may not have a charter, and they kind of come and go. You can hear about advisory boards in that setting, they kind of fizzle out. On-demand advisor panels are terrific for accelerators, for startups, for investment groups, where they pre-select an advisor panel and they choose them as they need them. Peer advisory boards are very common in the US market, where you might have one chair and you have multiple businesses around the table and they meet on a monthly basis and provide that peer support to each other. An advisory board of one is a very practical way to start, where a business will recruit their chair first and then they'll grow into their advisory board over time. Now, it may be that they then build an advisory board that it covers off on all of their business, or they could then go to the next stage and then build a pop-up advisory board where the advisory board of one becomes the conduit to the advisory market, where they can bring in advisors as they need them, as they pop in and pop out. It's a great return on investment model. You've got the continuity, but you get the specialisation as you need it. Project advisory boards is absolutely where the market is today, where 53% of advisory boards now are really project-based. So it's not about, the advisory board is not covering off on everything, but it's covering off on a particular strategy. So it could be you've got a 3-month or a 6-month advisory board to focus on a commercialisation strategy, or entering into a new market to focus on validation of a particular thing that they're focusing on, like sustainability, cyber, digital transformation. So these are very exciting advisory boards in the market today. They can also be called a whole lot of different things. Advisory councils are very common, panels, committees, reference groups, think tanks, working groups is very common. So it doesn't need to be called an advisory board. If there's resistance in an organisation saying we don't need another board, the fact is, if you're wanting to build a thinking system that's around problem solving, it's an advisory board in nature, call it something that makes it really relevant for the environment that it's in. If we just look at some of the market trends, the emerging business market makes up about 29% of advisory boards. So that's generally pre-revenue to 1.5 million. They're very volatile, so they'll start and then they stop. So fixed structures are not really ideal in that environment. So having on-demand advisor panels is terrific, or an advisory board of one that then becomes the conduit to other advisors as they need. This is very exciting. So accelerators like using this, startups, scale-ups, government-funded programs, investment communities. So they are very good models to use. And we've got a polling question.
Okay, I've launched the poll. The poll is, which of these is not an ABF 101 advisory board best practice framework? Clarity of scope, structure and discipline, dictatorship, independence, fit for purpose. Okay, it looks like almost everybody's voted, so I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share the results. And look, overwhelmingly, Louise, we have dictatorship as the one that people think doesn't fit.
You're absolutely right. So you all win the car. So that's absolutely right. And I'll go through the ABF 101 framework with all of you shortly. Thanks for that, David. The business sector is the home of advisory boards, and they are what we call the mid-market, 1.5 million to 100 million revenue and turnover. Generally, they'll have a structure of 2 internal representatives. They could be directors, business owners, a business owner and a CEO, an independent chair who's also an advisor, and 2 external advisors. So that makes 3 external parties and 2 internal parties. The chair will generally work with the business up front to establish the advisory board, and that has 3 stages to it. And then they support the organisation as they bring the external advisors on in either a fixed or a variable capacity. Now, the average size of a business in this part of the market having an advisory board is 20 million in revenue, and they'll invest between $40,000 to $70,000 for their advisory board when they're paid roles. In this business sector, you would expect to be paid because it's a commercial arrangement. And the impact of an advisory board in this part of the market is quite significant. So you can see up on the top right-hand side, we did a study on 400 businesses with an advisory board, of which 90% of them had a positive impact of their advisory board, a 15% upswing in their financial results, and 30% improvement in the confidence in their decision making that they had. So that's really quite subjective. That's how someone feels. But it demonstrates how important the advisory board is for the business owner as well it is for the business itself. Now, rates in the business sector, it can really vary, but most advisory board professionals, when they work as the chair, they'll charge a retainer of between $2,000 to $3,500 a month for half a day, or between $2,000 to $5,000 a month in retainer. If they're in a mentoring role in a smaller business, that could be less. If they're working in a large organisation, it could be a lot more than that as well. Advisors will then generally charge per meeting that they attend. Now, the governance dilemma I mentioned earlier is an increased constraint in organisations when they have a board of directors trying to be across everything that they do. Now, governance systems themselves are evolving because they're building advisory boards to supplement the deeper thinking of their executive, their CEO, or the governance board itself. So it could be around change. Customer advisory boards are very big in the US market. Cyber, diversity and inclusion. Ethics advisory boards are being used a lot in SaaS-based tech businesses, but then also with the utilisation of AI, automated vehicles, and also the space industry. Then we get businesses and organisations trying to navigate international markets, which is a hot topic right now with tariffs, mergers and acquisitions, and sustainability is probably one of the biggest areas, as well as digital transformation. There's a new wave of advisory boards coming in place too, and that is around stakeholder engagement with, as I mentioned, customer advisory boards and now even employee-based advisory boards. And the increased sophistication of family businesses moving into becoming investment houses, into it becoming a family office. Advisory boards are very common in being able to support the transition from being one family business with one business into multiple businesses and moving it into an investment strategy. So this is a very exciting phase of advisory boards. It's all about trust and confidence, though. I developed this model about a year ago with actually looking at the value exchange. What happens between an advisor and an advisee? What is in that one moment that someone feels confident to make a decision? And that confidence and trust is really paramount. So what we're seeing and identifying now is the importance of people who are already a trusted advisor and how they use their situation to not just build a moat around their client to protect their client, but actually be a conduit to adding value to their client by then connecting in with advisors that have got areas of specialisation that they don't have. So it's not a threat to their relationship, it's actually a value add to their relation and also helps them protect any potential liability that comes into providing advice that's not their area of expertise. So the trusted existing advisor, consultant, service provider is a really important part of that value exchange and adding additional value to existing clients. Now, especially when we're looking at things like blended roles, it can get tricky between what is the role of a director, the role of an advisory board chair, a role of an advisor, and role of external consultant. And careful mapping and consideration is really required. So the ABF 101 Advisory Board Best Practice Framework is the 5 principles that we just looked at in the poll. And they become a navigation tool about what's the right thing to do in this one individual situation, where we look at the 3 pillars of advice, which is around purpose, process, and people. So purpose is around clarity of scope. What are you there to do? what are you not there to do as an advisory board professional. Around process, it's about having structure and discipline, not constraint. The simpler the advisory board structure is, the better it is. And then measurement of impact. Then lastly, it's around people, about independence and an independent mindset and fit for purpose. Now, underlying this, there are two key documents that you have available to you, and that's the best practice framework, but then also the code of ethics. Both of them get updated every 2 years, so we've just gone through a release of both of these documents that are overseen by the Best Practice and Ethics Advisory Board. And back to a poll to you.
Thank you, and I'm just launching the poll now. And the poll is, are you currently on an advisory board, yes or no? And like almost everyone's voted. So with that, I'm going to close the poll and I will share the results. And most say no, but you've got a couple there who say yes. Back to you, Louise.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's good to know. So for those of you that have not been on an advisory board, it's then looking at aspirational, providing you information whether you do want to be on advisory board. And for those that are, it's about, looking at what is it that you could enhance your current advisory boards with. Look at the future of the profession again. Advisory firms will continue to come into this area, but managing any potential conflicts of interest is really important. So either the few different ways that this could go, and it would depend on the firm and the strategy of whether actually building advisory board services in as a firm offering or having it as an adjunct to and connecting into the advisory board community. So there's two very distinct approaches for that. For those of you that are building a portfolio, advisory boards provides an additional optionality. And so increasingly people want to be sitting on boards, but when we look at the issue of boards getting smaller and the increased risk profile of sitting on a board, actually broadening that out to sit on governance boards and advisory boards absolutely makes sense. So you might be sitting on a governance board and you might say, let's not increase the size of this governance board to address this particular issue. Let's build advisory boards. So you can actually build and be in a position of influence of having greater agility in a governance system than you do on a governance board. And having a portfolio of different things keeps you sharp and keep you really interested and connected to the community as well. Some people in the professional services sector, accounting or legal, want to transition longer term, but actually maintain a relationship with the firm that they're in. So advisory boards can potentially create a really great way to do that without creating conflicts of interest. So these are the I guess the emerging trends that are impacting the advisory board profession itself. And back to you for another poll.
Yeah, we sneaked another one in close to that last one to catch people out. So let me launch that next poll now. And the poll is an advisory board a decision, is an advisory board decision-making model, and it's yes or no? And let me close the poll. And let me share the results. And 82% is no, are no.
Okay, all right. So for those of you that are sitting on an existing advisory board, it'd be really good to review your charter, or sometimes it's called a term of reference, to ensure that your advisory board structure is not projecting itself into a decision-making approach. So being clear that it's not a decision-making model keeps it really clean in a broader ecosystem and reduce any potential risk and liability that's associated with that. We do know that there are some advisory boards out there that are making decisions, and it can be really problematic. Best practice and ethics really matter for the advisory board sector for the long term. So we have an independent best practice and ethics advisory board with representation from the Americas, from Asia, from Middle East and Europe, as well as the next generation. So they meet 4 times a year to look at the emerging trends of ethics as the advisory board sector continues to mature. Best practice will mature as well. So this is a really important part of the evolution of the advisory board sector. You too can also participate in our living research. So we are currently conducting research for the 2025 State of the Market report. If you're currently on an advisory board, I'm really interested to know what you think. That's really important for us. Our research is not to defend the sector, it's to challenge the sector. So we're not fearful of that. For also those of you that have either got an advisory board in your organisation, you can also participate. But if you have an aspiration to be on an advisory board, you can also participate for us to actually understand what are the barriers to entry for you to enter the advisory board sector. So where we see advisory boards, or where the Financial Times talks about advisory boards being the hot new governance trend, we think in the future it'll be the hot new leadership trend. We look at where advisory boards are adding value. It's to business owners, it's to startups, it's to governance boards, but also directly to a CEO or to executives. So everywhere within an organisation, it's the ability to be able to engage with the market, to bring the outside in, to make really good quality informed decisions. So that's where we think the market will be heading from here. Last poll to you.
Right. Well, we're not going to do the last poll now. That's for during the Q&A session, which is coming up next. So we'll get to another poll, but probably in about 10 minutes. So I'd like to ask our audience if you've got any questions to pop them into the Q&A. Else, I will start going through some that we prepared earlier. So the first question I have for you, Louise, is how are advisory boards different from startups to mid-sized businesses and then corporate entities?
Yeah, the agile nature of advisory boards in startups and scale-ups is really important. We've seen many years now people trying to build really fixed advisory structures too early and they break. The business sector traditionally like an all of business advisory board or a strategic advisory board where the advisory board is there to support a business owner with everything about their strategy. And so they'll meet generally 4 times a year with 1 independent chair and 2 external advisors, but they review it on an annual basis. And if the priorities of the business have changed, they'll change out their advisors. Generally, they'll stay with the chair, but they'll change out the advisors. In the governance model, in governance systems, large organisations, what's really very important is the establishment phase of it to map what's needed, what the reporting lines are, what the milestone reviews are as well. And generally they'll plan 12 months out and review it at least every 12 months and refresh the whole thing. When you're getting really specific project advisory boards, this is also happening in family business too, by the way. They'll recruit an independent chair, then they'll build different advisory boards of which that chair will then manage with the organisation. So they get the continuity with one chair, but they've got different advisory boards for different purposes. So that maintains that continuity.
So next question, which you won't have seen before, because I wrote it down as I was listening to you speak, and that is, you said you've got advisory boards, or you've been doing this in 8 different countries. So what is the difference between how, or no difference in how things operate in, say, Dubai versus Australia versus the United States?
Yeah, thank you. Our members doing advisory boards are actually in 31 countries. We run our programs in 8 countries. So they're like our key hubs, David. And when we run the program, so I'm heading off to London next week, just finished running programs in Singapore and Dubai. Best practice methodologies, the foundation of it is the same. How it gets adapted depends on the situation, what they want their advisory board to do, but also potentially for the region. So, for instance, in the business sector, David, we talk about it very commonly in the US, UK market and Australia. There's a very similar, Canada the same. There isn't a common acceptance to enable someone to feel vulnerable, and that's okay. In other markets, like in Singapore and Dubai, when we have that conversation, it actually evolves very quickly, but about vulnerability versus shame. So if I demonstrate to my advisory board that I'm vulnerable in something, that actually creates shame for me, because I'm demonstrating that I'm not doing my job, or my executives are not doing my job. And so it needs to be really carefully managed with regards to enabling people to listen to different perspectives. So a chair absolutely needs to know what they're doing from that culture lens. The same with family business too, in those two regions where the family unit is really important, and the relationship between the family unit and the business is very different to, say, what it is in Germany, where there's a feisty relationship between the family and the business unit in Europe. So yes, that cultural context, when you're sitting on a global advisory board, because you could be on an advisory board anywhere around the world, being really cognizant of that. And one of the methods in best practice is, when an advisory board is established, there's an orientation before the advisory board starts. So everyone understands the context and the kinds of conversations and the behaviours that are really going to really drive a quality outcome and impact, ultimate impact. You want any advisory board to be impactful, otherwise why do it? And that is challenging, because any organisation doesn't have an advisory board because they just want to maintain business as usual. That's just wasting everybody's time. So it means that whatever the advisory board is going to be talking about and thinking about, it's going to put pressure on the business or the organisation if they do something with that. So it needs to be done with a lot of care and a lot of considerations. Now, advisory board, they don't need to agree with each other. So consensus can actually kill the conversation. So an advisory board, because they're not there to make a decision, the outcomes of an advisory board is not necessarily a recommendation, but a series of considerations for the organisation to think through. So that way it's not patronising the existing structure that's in place. But it does need to be done with a lot of care and a lot of rigour at the same time.
Right. So I'm going to stay on culture for a moment, because you've had me thinking about things there. What I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you don't want three of the same type of person on an advisory board. You want people to bring in different skills, different thought processes. You also don't want them to confront each other. You want them to work with each other. So it strikes me that choosing the right candidate for an advisory board will depend on the mix of what you've got already. But who makes that decision on who should be on the advisory board? Is it the people currently on the advisory board, or is it the owner of the business or their executive team?
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, it's actually understanding what is the advisory board there for. And we have a technique called the top three technique around what are the top three priorities that advisory board is going to focus on. Right? A governance board has a skills matrix. An advisory board doesn't have a skills matrix, it has a priority matrix. So based on those priorities of the businesses to the profiles of the external parties, and if there's three, that gives you three different profiles of people, so you get that automatic diversity. Now, and those priorities might change, which means that those advisors might need to change as well over time. Now, as the advisory board is not there to make decisions, nor is the chair there to make decisions. The chair is there to guide the decision maker or the sponsor in the decision-making process. So it's really important to understand who is the sponsor or the champion internally, and then who's playing the secretariat function. It's what we call the golden triangle, actually, the role of the sponsor, the secretariat, and the chair. Those three working together, but being independent, really important. So it's up to whoever the sponsor is as to who makes that final decision about who's on that advisory board. We also, from a culture of an advisory board too, David, everything has a use by date, right? So we say it's never forever. So if the advisory board has done its job or it's not needed anymore, it should be able to be cut at any given time, right? So that creates a high level of intellectual honesty because it's actually not about selling time. It's about being really impactful and purposeful in the way that those work. But yes, being very clear, the advisory board members themselves do not, mark their own homework, so to speak.
So that's touched on culture. How about industry? Are there specific sectors that use advisory boards more than others?
Yeah, up to 3 years ago, I'd say 3 years ago, we had a very clear line of sight of that. Now we don't have as much clear line of sight because they are popping up everywhere. But traditionally, if we look at the business sector, we could see the 5 key markets. Now, the professional services sector is by far the largest user of advisory boards. And you'd say, well, rightly so, because if you're providing advice, you know what it's like to receive advice. So professional services sector and industry, SaaS-based tech businesses is the largest industry for advisory boards, and certainly for customer advisory boards too, which is big in the US market. Then you get the other parts of the market like industrial and resources, which includes manufacturing and advanced manufacturing, emerging industries, and so the energy sector as an example, wherever there are investment houses at the moment. Health and life sciences is also a large part of the market. Australia, where I'm from, they've actually regulated advisory boards in the health sector for aged care, for customer advisory boards and employee advisory boards. This is a big shift in the market. And then food and agriculture has been the other part of the market. So they were traditionally the largest parts of the market. Now, say for example, in 2021, 43% of advisory boards were in the professional services sector. In 2023, it was 34%. Not that professional services had decreased, but because it's just so many sectors now that are using them. Saudi Arabia, as an example, they've just regulated advisory boards for the university sector. And universities around the world are really being challenged. So we'd expect an increased use of advisory boards in with universities as well as regulators.
Okay. So how do you add an advisory board to, if you've got a portfolio, how do you add an advisory board in from scratch? What's the first step?
The first step would be to be really clear about what is my value and who's going to value it. What are my motivations? What's my value? So what are my areas of specialisation? What am I known for? And if you can get that down to your top 3 areas of specialisation, that's great. And what are the markets that you're wanting to work in? Now, from that, you can then evaluate what's my potential service offering that I can provide? How can the market buy me? And what's going to give me joy? And what's going to give me curiosity? Because advisory boards is not just necessarily what you know, but it's how you're going to problem solve with others. So curiosity is your largest strength in the advisory board space. If you're deeply curious about things, that's what's going to really drive advisory board activity. And then having really clear service lines about knowing this is how I do governance boards, advisory boards, consulting, interim executive. And then having really good quality of conversations. When you go to market with advisory boards, you can't sell advisory boards. They've got to be ready for it. So it's all about education. You've got to educate, because they may have an idea about what advisory boards are, but it may be actually not what they really are today. So the opportunity to sit in front of someone, be curious, have really good quality conversations, and educate, then it creates opportunities.
Okay, so I'm going to run our last poll now, and I hope everybody will answer it in the way that it's intended, and it is, are you enjoying this webinar? And the answers are yes or no. So let's see what you come up with there. Oh, quick responses coming in. And so my eyes are all over the place. I've got 4 different screens here. So we have 100% coming in with yes. Let me just close the poll and let me share the results. So it looks like 100% are enjoying it, which is good because we know where you all live. And what I'm going to do is hide the poll now. And I've got a couple more questions left. If anybody has got anything else they'd like us to ask Louise, then please post it under questions now. But my next question, maybe I missed this earlier in the presentation, but if you're aspiring to get on an advisory board, you've just listened to a presentation about it, what's the first step you should take to ready yourself to do that? What sort of people do you need to contact?
Well, the Advisory Board Centre is one source. There are a few different, firms, organisations providing advisory board services. As a professional body, we help people to evaluate whether advisory boards is right for them or not, and it's a discovery process. There's no cost to that. If they want to be part of best practice, then there's the credential called the Certified Chair Executive Program and being part of the global best practice community. So that's if you're really wanting to really dedicate yourself to the advisory board profession. There are no barriers to entry with regards to entering onto advisory boards. I just think it's really dangerous today to be winging the area of advice when the whole advisory sector, whatever part of the advisory sector it is, we all need to step up and do better. But the simplest way would be to really think through and do the exercise around what are your motivations, your specialisations, and the markets you're wanting to work in. And I would, if you were testing out your market, go out there and have conversations with people that you know and have the conversation about it. The State of the Market report, I think you've got that as an attachment there, David. That
Yes.
provides everyone with a bit of background to what's happening around the world. Just socialise it and just say, what do you think? And have those conversations to see, whether it's something in your region or in your sectors that it'd be something worthwhile looking at.
So which sector, again, you may have touched on this earlier, but which sector is most, should we say, adoptive of advisory boards? Which is the biggest? You mentioned health, you mentioned energy, you mentioned them, but is there one that stands out from the rest?
There's 2, professional services and SaaS-based tech businesses.
Okay.
In the business market.
Oh, that's good. So many people here are in professional services, so I guess there's an affinity there. And I guess, is there a limit on how many boards you should think of sitting on? Because I know many of our members are on several boards, and it may only be a short slice of time, but it's quite a big commitment. So with advisory boards, I guess you said, you might need one person going on just to nudge things along a little bit, but is there any guidance on how many you should take on for it to be manageable?
Look, there's no regulation around it, so it's up to you. I think anyone, depends on the model. If you're a chair, it would be very difficult to be chairing more than 5 or maybe 6 advisory boards. When I was chairing advisory boards, I chaired 5. And when I was chairing 3, I knew I was really absolutely in the moment and really fresh and really focusing on value. If you get too busy, you can't be the champion for the organisations you're there to serve. So you just got to be really careful. Unless you have alternative models, like accounting firms very often will provide an advisory board light version of having quarterly advisory board meetings, but not having the mentoring in between. But you miss a lot in that. But it is a model. So it can be quite interesting looking at the way that's structured. But you need to look at the way that model works and how you actually provide that service offering, how you actually provide that offering to the market to do it justice, to do it well.
So Louise, you've been on a number of boards, right, or advisory boards. Have you ever come across, and I'm sure you will if you can remember it, have you come across one thing that's made you think that is a great example of something I'm going to use to tell people about because I've just observed it in this board I'm on? Is there a great example you can give to share with us?
Yeah, many. So we measure impact of advisory boards on an annual basis as part of the methodology. And so without a measurement system, it's really difficult to quantify the impact of an advisory board. And so measuring increase in confidence, measuring impact on the financial results, if financial results is actually the net result. Or is it about bringing alignment inside an organisation around a particular strategy like innovation or digital transformation, which is a big area now? There are so many really good stories, but I think for the group that we have today, the business sector is a really important part of this market, that you can see the impact an advisory board has not only on the business but on the life of the individual. And I just know from my own experience being the receiving end of an advisory board, what impact that had on my life, because I was making confident decisions that I wasn't second guessing on. That increase in confidence, that equals sleep, 30% more sleep. So those things that keep you awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, never underestimate the importance that advisory boards, it's not just a construct, it's a very human story. And for people that are in the advisory board sector that's on the call today should be really, really proud of the work that you do in that multi-dimensional space.
So I've got one last question for Louise, and then we'll do a wrap. I think we've got enough time for it. And that is, what is the one thing that you would like attendees here, our audience, to take away from this presentation?
Be really deeply considered about advisory boards. It's a profession on its own. Take it seriously and do it well. Make sure it's impactful, but then also safe from a governance perspective, because we want to build, we've got a 100-year strategy as a professional body. We want to make sure that the advisory board sector is something that all of us are really proud of.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And with that, let me thank you, Louise, and let me thank our audience. And do fill in the survey when you exit, and note if you want Louise to contact you or if you have any additional questions. And with that, this wraps up our webinar program for 2024. We'll be back with new material in 2025. So until then, thank you again, Louise, and goodbye.
Thanks, David.